clearly contrast in style as well as substance. I would hesitate to say it's the end because you still have some members of Congress, I think, who reflect a different point of view. I think we're in a transitional period. And the Republican Party has changed from being a party, country club Republicans, corporate Republicans, whatever you want to call them, to a party that's more working class and more populist, both in terms of definitionally how it transcends, how it transacts as politics, but also policy. And you're seeing the populist edges of that in this Trump-Vance ticket. So I don't necessarily think that the party of old is dead. I do think that it is a different party and it continues to become a different party. There may be a point at which that's true, but for now at least, I think there is still some influence of these more traditional points of view on the party.
Well, do you worry that this economic populism, some call isolationism, is dangerous for the party, for the country?
Well, I think there's some areas in which the policy prescriptions are not quite what I would advocate for. So we're going to have a big discussion over tax reform next year with the expiration of provisions in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And I think there will be a very real discussion, for example, around the corporate tax rate. This is one area where I think where I think the sort of Trump-Vance view of the world, maybe more the Vance view of the world, differs from what we might expect traditional Republicans to argue for. In a large tax reform package, it would not surprise me to see the corporate tax rate move in a direction opposite than what we saw in the 2017 round of reform, just because the premium is going to be placed on individual tax reform, and given the deficit and debt posture we have, I have a really difficult time seeing that tax cut being completely unpaid for. So I do think that there are ways in which we are going to see some differences beginning to develop.
Well, to the point our colleague Laura was making, when it comes to, say, the tax conversation, that ultimately is one that has to originate in Congress just to be signed by President whomever. Does JD Vance have less power to influence that as vice president than he would as a United States senator?
Oh, I don't think so at all. Even though the conversation on tax in particular will start in the House, the vice president, particularly if, let's say, a future President Trump empowers his vice president to be on point on these things, he will have a tremendous amount of influence over where this conversation goes. And given how divided and fractured the Congress is, how much we're seeing expertise leaving the Congress with long-term members of Congress who have experience in tax and economic policy leaving, it does place a premium on leadership from the executive branch, in my view. So I actually think that JD Vance is in a terrific position to influence policy, whether it's economic policy or any of the other areas he's interested in.
Deficits ballooned under the Trump administration, and you'll then tell me that they ballooned more under the Biden administration. But are we going to do it all over again under Trump 2.0?
It doesn't seem like a lot of the constraints are there anymore. The political constraints have departed, right? I mean, there used to be some in our politics who were arguing in favor of fiscal discipline and talking about the value of entitlement reform. That conversation seems to be off the table. So I do fear that in the short to intermediate run, we are looking at a situation where fiscal constraints have been lifted, and there is very little to constrain spending, whether of the tax expenditure variety or direct spending, or even bolstering of entitlement programs. So we're in a very different world now than we were in 2012 when I was helping the Romney-Ryan ticket.
Well, we're in a different world in a lot of ways, including conflict that is outbroken in multiple theaters, including, of course, the war in Ukraine, which JD Vance has not expressed support for continuing to fund. In fact, when he was on Fox News last night, we played a little bit earlier in the program, this idea that he was like, we need to focus on China. Forget about the conflict in Ukraine. China, he said, is the biggest threat facing the United States. I ask you this as the son of immigrants from Taiwan. Do you agree with that sentiment? What should we expect to see when it comes to China policy from this ticket?
First of all, I would hope as the greatest country on earth, we could walk and chew gum at the same time, meaning that we could attend to both of these really significant issues. There is no question, though, Senator Vance is absolutely right, that China is the single biggest foreign policy and national security issue that we have to face over the next several years. I think if this administration continues some of the policy work we saw in the first Trump administration, we'll be in very good stead. I think one of the areas where I believe the Biden administration has really let down the American people is in having a more coherent set of strategic goals around our engagement with China, or lack thereof. So I do think that what this potential Trump administration will bring, I would hope, is a more coherent perspective on where are we trying to get to with China? What's the eventual goal? And that also implicates issues like Taiwan, specifically human rights, if that's going to be an issue. And then most importantly, probably for the audience here, trade and economic issues.
Nikki Haley is speaking tonight at the convention. I suspect you might be in the hall. Will she channel Mitt Romney or Donald Trump?
I think she'll channel Nikki Haley.
Yeah.
I mean, she's managed to
You know where I'm
navigate.
going here.
Yeah, no, I understand. But here's the thing: she has the capacity to help unite the Republican Party. By the way, the Republican Party is the most united I've seen it in a while around candidate and former President Trump. But I think Nikki Haley has the potential to speak to maybe that small sliver that's still disaffected. But she goes beyond that. She speaks to independents. She speaks to people who haven't made a decision in this election yet. And I think she's got a tremendous ability to speak to all of the issues we've talked about. I mean, seeing her as a presidential candidate up close during that election that we've just had, she's a very skilled communicator and potentially a very great asset to the Trump-Vance ticket.
Of course, she might be a little bit disappointed herself as she considers 2028 now that JD Vance has been the vice presidential
A lifetime away.
Nominee. Surely it is. And as we have learned in recent days, literally anything possible can happen. And on that note, after the attempted assassination last weekend on Donald Trump, he has said himself he is reworking the speech he will give on Thursday, that he wants to focus on unity. I guess my question to you would be, knowing and having watched Donald Trump for all these years now, do you believe that unity message can actually stick for the next 3.5 months?
You know, we'll see if it does or not. I mean, I think politicians tend to sort of go back to form pretty often and in a comfort spot, but Donald Trump's not a typical politician, right? So he very well could. He very well could. Not unusual, by the way, for a convention speech to be reworked up until the end. I mean, so it doesn't surprise me that they're still looking at what to do with it. But he has an opportunity, if he continues on this theme, to truly move the country forward, and I think to gain the support of people who may have been skeptical of him before. So I think the political opportunity is irresistible. If you think about the ways in which they might position this speech or think about what the speech can do. So I don't want to make any predictions. I'm not part of the process, but we'll see what happens.